everyone! For today's unboxing video, I am really excited to be taking a closer look at Stalogy Editor's series Yoseka Green. This is a notebook that we were developing with Stalogy in celebration of Stalogy's 10th year anniversary. And I'm really excited to show everyone the details of this notebook and also to talk a little bit about Editor series and Stalogy for anyone who's unfamiliar with Stalogy and this brand of stationery. So for anyone who doesn't know, Stalogy actually stands for three words. It's actually stationery, standard, and technology. And the reason that Stalogy chose that for their name is actually because Stalogy was started by a science company, a manufacturing company, and they have a background actually primarily in adhesives. So that's where the technology part comes in. So their aim in their stationery collection is actually to raise the standard of stationery using their technology science background. So they have made a lot of popular stationery products, such as this notebook here in front of us is called the Editor Series notebook. And I have to say that this is probably one of our most popular collections of notebooks in the store, both online and physically in store. People love the look of it and people love the paper inside. So any notebook enthusiasts out there, if you haven't heard of Stalogy Editor Series, this is definitely one to try. Actually, Stalogy started 10 years ago in 2012, and back in October of 2022, Stalogy celebrated their 10th year anniversary. We have 10 years of fun products from Stalogy, like the Editor Series notebook, and they also make a lot of cool things like sticky notes and adhesive tabs and things like that, since that is really primarily where their manufacturing background is from. But I think that the Editor Series notebook is probably the most successful out of everything Stalogy, and definitely so for our store. So we are excited that we were able to celebrate Stalogy's 10th year anniversary by making our very own version of Stalogy Editor Series in Yoseka Green. And for anyone who doesn't know, Yoseka Green, it's a forest green color, and I like to think of it as Yoseka Green because it's certainly a color that I associate with our store and our store's history. So for anyone who doesn't know the story behind Yoseka, Neil's parents actually have a stationery store in Taiwan that they started in 1981, and in that store they actually wear these aprons here. That's where we got these aprons, and they have a sign that's green. So his parents actually chose the green color for their store back in Taiwan, and this is the store where Neil really grew up, and his sisters grew up working there. His brother works there now. His whole family is really in this store, and their store inspired us to start our very own stationery store here in New York City a few years ago, and we have sort of echoed the dark green Yoseka Green in a lot of the themes and a lot of our own releases throughout the years. So we thought that for our Stalogy Editor Series notebook, it would be perfect in this Yoseka Green. And as you can see, it really is quite a perfect match with the apron color. So that turned out very well. I have to give out a shout out to Stalogy for helping us put together this wonderful notebook. Okay, so now to give a little bit more specific introduction on Stalogy Editor Series notebooks. The Editor Series notebooks are actually primarily grid notebooks that can be used as both a planner or a journal as well as simply a notebook, and I think that is part of the reason why they're so popular, because they are so versatile. While there are other styles now, there's plain and there's dot grid, primarily what they do is grid, and it's a very light gray subtle grid, which we will take a look at a little bit later. But before we do that, Editor Series notebooks are rather hefty. They come in a few different sizes. They have the A5 size, which is our Yoseka Green, B6 as well, and they come in A6 as well over here. So here's a little snapshot of the size comparisons between A6, B6, and A5. And they also make actually a B5 version, which would be double this B6. Stalogy also makes other versions of this notebook, but these 3 sizes, I would say, are the most common and the most popular sizes. The cool thing about the Stalogy Editor series is that they come with 368 pages. So it's called Stalogy Editor Series 365 days. So you get 1 page a day for every day of the year, and then they give you a couple extra as well. And then they also make these half-year versions as well. Each of these sizes, the A5, the B6, as well as the A6, they come in full year and half-year versions. And you can see for comparison, this is the thickness of a 365-day version, and this is the thickness of a half-year version. So it's good for those who really are using this as a journal or planner, and they like to have their year wrapped up perfectly in 1 book or 2 books if you're using the half year. Something else about Stalogy is that they come in a few main colors. They come in black, they come in red, yellow, and blue, and we have the black and the yellow here for you guys to see today, but they also come in red and blue. And in recent years, they have begun to hop on that limited edition train that everyone seems to be doing and sort of choosing 3 colors that are limited edition that they release every year. They've been doing this for the last couple of years, and they're really good at choosing which colors. So I'm looking forward to seeing this year's 2023's limited edition colors, but this is gonna be a limited edition color, the Yoseka green, that I'm excited to share with you all today. Okay, so let's take a look at the Yoseka Green Stalogy Editor Series, and we'll take a look at the Stalogy Editor Series notebook details. Stalogy's designs are, for the most part, very minimal, and they are all about sort of putting function first and thinking about how people use things and putting the design and like extra design details secondary, I would say. So their products, for the most part, are extremely simple but well made, and they just have very slight embellishments, but they're not in your face with their branding or anything like that. So this is an editor series cover, and you can see over here they have some embossed details. It says stationery, standard, and technology, which I mentioned these 3 words make up Stalogy, and what should have been is, which is sort of like their slogan, and then little Stalogy logo embossed here. And the details are so simple and very, very subtle. So that is kind of nice. It makes this notebook appropriate to use in a office, professional setting, in a classroom, or however else you want to use it. Okay, so this is what a page looks like inside a Stalogy Editor series. It is, as you can see, a really light gray grid, and this is a 4mm grid. And then there are some subtle details that are also incorporated into the design of this notebook that I'd like to point out. I do want to say I like how the grid goes right up to the margins, and you get to really utilize the most out of the space of this A5 page. So if you were to write in the grid of these notebooks, you would really be able to fit quite a lot on your page and throughout your notebook. So it is great for note-taking, great for like a classroom notebook in that way. Now, there are some details incorporated here and on the left-hand side of the page going down. This is a timeline. So these details are really for you to use if you are thinking about using this as a planner or a journal. They give you a way to indicate the date. I'll show everybody a little closer up because this is super, super tiny, and I think that some people do complain about these details are too tiny for them to see, and the gray that is printed in is a little bit too light. But I think that that's part of the design. It's because they don't want you to be too distracted by it if you're not going to be using that detail. So here you can see on the upper right-hand side of each page, there's 3 rows of little characters. And the first row is actually the months of the year going from January to December. The second row is actually the days of the week going from Monday to Sunday. And then on the very last row is numbers from 1 to 31 to indicate the date. So you are meant to use those to underline, highlight, or however you want to circle in just to indicate the date that this page is for if you're going to be using it as a journal. Okay, another detail that is very light and subtle is that on the left-hand margin of the page going down, we have the number 0 to 24 over here to represent a timeline for the day. So that timeline can be utilized if you divide your page in half or thirds and really want to track activities or do habit tracking. You can utilize the timeline feature. But like I said, all of these details are super subtle and gray, light gray printed, so that you can ignore them if you don't want to use those details. So that was a little bit about the format and sort of like the specifications of the A5 Stalogy Editor Series 365 Days. And that is what you would find in any Stalogy Editor Series 365 Days in an A5 size. But what makes this one special is just simply that we put our Yoseka green customized cover on it. So for anybody who's wondering, like, is this different from any other Editor Series notebook? No, it's not. We just put our green on it. So something else that people often debate with Stalogy is the paper. People talk about whether it's fountain pen friendly and what the best pen is for it. So I thought I would do some testing with different pens today to figure out what works best on Stalogy paper and to see how fountain pen friendly it is. Does it feather? Does it smear? And is there show through on the back side? Stalogy Editor Series paper, since this is a 365 days notebook, there are a lot of pages in here, so they have used a really thin and lightweight paper, and it is a 52 GSM paper, which if you know paper, it sounds like Tomoe River paper, which also comes in a 52 GSM paperweight. So a lot of comparisons are drawn between Stalogy paper and Tomoe River paper. There are special features in Stalogy paper. They made this paper to be bleed proof, so that there are sizing agents that are incorporated in the paper making process. And for Stalogy paper, they have actually, instead of just coating it on the paper, they've actually let the sizing agents kind of seep through the paper so that the prevention of bleeding and feathering happens on the inside of the page, so that you really make sure it doesn't bleed over to the other side of the page. So we'll kind of put that to the test as we try out some of the different pens and see what works best on Stalogy paper. Today's test, we're going to be starting with an oil-based ballpoint pen. This is the Uni Jetstream, and we're going to see how it does on the Stalogy paper, but theoretically ballpoint pens should do really, really well on all paper. So hopefully, fingers crossed. Okay, next up we are going to be using two different gel pens because there's lots of different gel pens, and these are two of our favorites. These are Uniball 1 and this is Zebra Sarasa Clip in the vintage color. So next up, we're going to be using a highlighter to see if felt tip pens have ink that gives the Stalogy paper any sort of trouble if it bleeds through or anything like that. And then we're going to use a brush pen. This is the Tombow dual tip brush pen, and it has a really large brush felt tip, so I thought this would be good for seeing how much of that ink can penetrate through to the other side of the paper. All right, and then next we're going to be using some fountain pens. This is a Sailor in an extra fine, which is going to be a super fine pen. I'm not expecting any troubles with this extra fine pen, but then we're going to compare it to this Platinum Preppy in a medium nib, which is really quite thick, to test the limits of thickness and really water-based inks on the Stalogy paper. Okay, and last up, I'm going to be testing some fountain pen inks with the dip pen, and this is really going to be the most wet application of all the pens because it's a dip pen. I'm using a glass dip pen, and I'll be testing Dominant Industry Lapis Lazuli as well as Pilot Iroshizuku Shoro. So I chose these two inks because Dominant Industry Lapis Lazuli has some kind of outstanding fountain pen ink qualities. It's a shimmering ink and it's a sheening ink, which has quite a lot of sheen on most papers, so we'll see if the sheen comes through when you're using Stalogy paper. And then I chose Shoro because Pilot Iroshizuku inks are known to be extremely wet, and so a wet ink tends to feather more and bleed through more in different papers. So this is one that will really push this Stalogy 52 GSM paper to its limits and see if it does bleed through or how it does on this paper. Okay, and last but not least in my little ink test, I guess I shouldn't have called it a pen test because this is not going to be a pen that I'm testing. I'm going to be testing a stamp because I often get questions from people about, do stamps, ink pads bleed through thin paper, especially when it comes to Tomoe River. That's a common question, and I know that people are going to be asking that about Stalogy paper too. I'm going to be using a Shachihata Warabe ink pad, but any kind of ink pad from Shachihata will kind of be the same. It'll be an oil-based ink, and it will have that really special Shachihata woven stamp pad surface that ensures that you don't get too much ink on your stamp. So whenever I test any stamps, I always use a Shachihata pad because I think that's kind of a really good overall pad to use. Okay, so here's my page. I made a little bit of a nude mistake, which is that I stamped the stamp and then I tried to write next to it, and I smeared ink all over my hands and I smeared the wet ink on the stamp pad. But it's okay. You do need to let stamp imprints dry after you stamp them. You can see here that it is a little bit smeared. All of these pens, and I'll run my finger across the gel and the Uniball, the gel pen and the ballpoint pen, the highlighter, the brush pen, all of these are dry. Let's see if the fountain pen inks are dry. They're dry, so actually Stalogy is a pretty fast drying paper. I will have to admit that I'm surprised that the fountain pen inks that were really wet dried even relatively quickly after I wrote. And all of these inks are looking like they did okay on this paper, pretty well on this paper. There's actually no feathering on anything, which I am pleasantly surprised by. I think there is a little bit of feathering along this Pilot Iroshizuku over here where the application of the ink is especially dense, but overall all of the characters, all of the letter formations are holding their form, as you can see over here. Oh my god, I smeared the stamp again. Let's see how it did on the other side of the page. There's definitely show through, and for anyone who doesn't know, there is some of the paper qualities that I'm talking about and referring to are bleed through and feathering and show through. Bleed through is when an ink is actually so it like destroys the paper and it actually leaks through to the other side of the back side of the page. And then there's feathering. In some really inky applications, one line A thin line of ink will actually sort of begin to widen and feather out past that line because the paper is not holding that ink very well. So it's spreading, and that quality is called feathering. Then there's the quality of show through, and sometimes that's called ghosting, because you will be able to see to a certain extent what you wrote on one side of the paper on the other side of the paper. So as you can see here, I wrote on this side the test, and there is some significant ghosting or show through on the other side of the page. I have to say that that is not a surprise with any sort of really thin, lightweight paper. This is 52 GSM paper. It's a really thin piece of paper, as you can see here. So show through and ghosting is definitely part of a thin and lightweight paper. But if that bothers you, this might not be the best paper for you, but it doesn't actually affect your writing on the other side because the ink has not bled through. You can simply see what you wrote on the other side of the page. Because the paper is quite thin, I can feel some of the imprints that I made on the other side because the paper is thin, and that is especially true for this ballpoint pen, since you do have to push a little bit harder with ballpoint pen. Other than that, as you can see, there's no bleed through, there's significant show through, and the inks dried pretty quickly, except for this stamp ink, which I smeared so horrifically. I'm gonna do another smear test here now that it's been a couple of minutes, and it's definitely better, but I will say that this paper requires some dry time with oil-based stamp pads. Regarding fountain pen friendliness, I wanted to see if any of the sheen that is so prevalent in Dominant Industry 19 lapis lazuli would be transferred and translated over with the Stalogy paper, because it's really brought out on lots of other papers. I know from previous testing, the ink sheens a lot on Tomoe River paper and a lot on Life paper and MD paper, actually. I wanted to see if there's any sheen on this Stalogy paper. Seeing some sheen right here. Oh, I'm actually seeing sheen throughout. I am. Okay, so that concludes my little ink test on Stalogy paper. I have to say that I'm surprised by how well it held up against most of these inks. I typically recommend that Stalogy paper, being a thinner paper, is best with finer fountain pens, but I actually tested some really wet inks. This dip pen, which gave a very wet application, and I was pleasantly surprised to see no bleeding. I think that there are some differences. Obviously, no two inks are exactly the same, so there are some inks that are definitely going to be more temperamental, that might feather and bleed on this paper. Pilot Iroshizuku is a very wet ink, and it held its own on this Stalogy paper with the application of a glass dip pen, so I'm surprised about that. I think that's about it for this unboxing. I'm really excited about our Yoseka green, and to realize our Yoseka green on a Stalogy Editor Series notebook is very, very cool, because it is definitely a beloved notebook in the notebook stationery community. I hope you all like this color and enjoy seeing it on your Stalogy collection. And let us know in the comments what you think about Stalogy paper. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!